Examples of full enlightenment. Hello, this is Shores of Infinity, Chris speaking with a video about examples of full enlightenment. Who was fully enlightened in history? Just as a benchmark, what is actually meant in India with enlightenment. There's no point in emulating them, in copying them, because everyone has to find his or her own way, but they're like beacons. They give useful hints now and then. For some reason, Maya allows some people to get beyond the threshold. Only a few. It's not really a danger to the layers of illusion of Maya because no one believes them anyway, and those who do believe them, that they are enlightened, don't understand them anyway. It's a bit like in the movie The Matrix, where the architect and the oracle allow a neo to happen every cycle. If that is a good thing for humanity, who knows? Yuji and Jet McKenna think it's a big distraction. Don't follow any gurus. That said, some examples of people to whom full enlightenment has happened, although at this point they're not people anymore. There's no personality left. First of all, the Buddha. The Buddha who founded Buddhism, or on whose ideas and teaching Buddhism was founded. In the whole of human history, is probably the one who explored the highest reaches of consciousness to the very limits. Unfortunately, we don't have anything that he said. We only have information about what he might have said. A few hundred years after his death, some texts were written that are still available to us. Everything before has been lost, at least in written form. Orally, some traditions like the Tibetan Buddhism say that they have an unbroken line of oral tradition up to the current Karmapa. Next, Meher Baba. Very, very special being. He stopped talking at some point and only wrote. For example, the book God Speaks, which in my view is one of the best books ever written. For some weird reason, he's not very well known outside of India, which might actually be a good thing. Next, Sri Aurobindo. He was first politically active, but then he had an enlightenment experience. Then he was thrown into jail for his political aims against the British Empire, where he had another enlightenment experience, and since then it only went uphill. He abandoned his political career, fled to Pondicherry, a French part of India, and started an ashram there, and became one of the most prominent figures in India. And still to this very day, the Indian Independence Day is Sri Aurobindo's birthday, the 15th of August. Sri Aurobindo had a spiritual companion whom he named the Mother, because in his view she was the incarnation of the Divine Mother, of the Divine Goddess. And he let her run the ashram, and after his death she continued to run the ashram until she died age 95. And for some weird reason she was very fascinated with occult things, so she tinkered around in the vital realm a lot, and it took her a long time to get to the stage of full enlightenment. Only within the last 3 years, and especially in the last months before her death, she managed to permanently transition into full enlightenment. Another person a little bit similar in a way is Yuji Krishnamurti, who hovered around the threshold of full enlightenment for a long time. But not because of his interest in occultism. He didn't have any. but because of his extreme skepticism and pragmatism. For him, the biggest threat to people waking up and having enlightenment or full enlightenment happening to them was the fascination with gurus. So he became the first great anti-guru. He died at the beginning of the century, but we have a new anti-guru now, who's also fully enlightened, Jed McKenna. Very few people know how he looks like, and the name is probably a pseudonym, but he's out there. Watch his space. Another example of an alive person who is fully enlightened is Mother Meera, who is an Indian who is living in Germany. Like Jed, she has a great sense of humor, and I love her videos because she's not talking at all. She's just meditating. You can watch her meditating daily. There's a daily meditation video of her not talking, which is great. Reminds me a bit of Meher Baba. Another female thingy to whom full enlightenment has happened was Bernadette Roberts. I say thingy because it's not a person anymore after this has happened. No one ever went to greater lengths to describe what the self is and what it is not. And also what happens exactly in the transition between enlightenment and full enlightenment. UG had mentioned it also, that it's a complete transformation, not only of the psyche but also of the body. But Bernadette Roberts, she was very good with words, and she wrote a couple of very cool books, What is the Self, The Real Christ, and so on. And there are some videos out there already on YouTube where she is trying to explain the self, which for her is more of a whole than a thing, while others describe the self as a construction, as a density. Another example is H.W.L. Poonja, also known as Papaji. Very funny guy, and there are some videos available on YouTube of conversations with him. Then, of course, Shivapuri Baba was probably the oldest person ever. He was 140 something when he died, and somehow John Bennett heard of him, found him, and interviewed him. So there's a book about Shivapuri Baba as well. The Long Pilgrimage, because he traveled the world half of his life. Also very hard to understand how a few people have heard of him. He's not popular. Almost no one ever heard of him. Although he lived that long and traveled so much. And he's also not, if you look into the Guinness Book of Records, for example, who is the oldest person, he's not in there, but he should be. Then on the other hand, he wasn't a person anymore, was he? Now I could go on listing a few more Indian examples of full enlightenment, but what about outside of India? There are some living ones that I don't feel good about mentioning, so I won't. And there are some founders of religion I also don't want to mention because some people get very touchy when you talk about them. For some reason, there are very few Sufi masters who reached full enlightenment because they are so absorbed in the love phase, usually, that they don't want to lose this. When you go to the beyond enlightenment phase, you lose this feeling of being in love with the divine and being loved by the divine. Because you need to remain a person to be loved and to love. But there are several examples of Christian context, for example, St. Francis of Assisi. Another problem within the Christian and Muslim context was that you really had to take care what you said and wrote, otherwise your life could get very short. Another non-Indian example, which is a bit more obscure, is Don Juan. As Carlos Castaneda himself was not fully enlightened, it's hard to imagine how he was able to describe someone who is fully enlightened. So I assume that he had a teacher who was fully enlightened. Of course, his name was not Don Juan Matus. He changed the name. He wrote that also, that he changed the name and the location and everything. Unfortunately, most people who read Castaneda's books were more interested in the sorcery and psychedelic side, not so much in the path of knowledge side. But if you read The Journey to Ixtlan, or Ixtlan, it's all in there. Masked and obscured, of course, by that Central American cultural context and tradition. So the usefulness of Carlos Castaneda's books is, of course, very questionable, and it's much better to use plain spoken examples, like Jed McKenna, for example, or UG, or Sri Aurobindo, or Meher Baba. Or videos, like UG videos, Papaji videos, Nisargadatta Maharaj videos. I like Nisargadatta Maharaj too, he's always screaming at people. But not in English, unfortunately. Why don't you get it already? Because, of course, there is nothing to get and no one to get it. Thank you for joining me on Patreon. Thank you to all my Patreons. Thank you for liking and subscribing and sharing the videos with your friends, and see you soon.